And good evening, everyone. Hope you guys can hear me. This is James Zero back here with another TV review, and this one is one of my ultra favorites. And I grew up watching this one when it was out on TV as a kid. This is Batman Beyond season one, and I'm gonna dive right in. So the quick story synopsis is that Bruce Wayne is pretty much old and he has a heart condition and he can't be Batman, and he broke one of his rules by almost killing someone by picking up a gun. And the first season was really, I think it was like 13 episodes. It was really trying to stretch the grounds of what the series was going to be. And I'm really glad they did this. This was an original piece, to the Batman mythos, and now it's in within the comics. And like I said, I relate with Terry a lot more, especially being in high school, dealing with some of the stuff. The ironic and funny thing is that I saw a forum where they said technically they ripped off a little bit of Spider-Man. If you think about it, you got the teenage superhero, and then in season two, he gets more involved in his high school banter and more high school based episodes. But we'll talk about that when we get to season two. But for season one, it was more of to me that Terry was really entering the world of Batman, and one of the best lines was in the pilot episode is when he told him, I could be a difficult taskmaster, and he's like, yeah, I'm up to it, and then he says, very well, Mr. McGinnis, welcome to my world. So as soon as those final words were said, he did literally step into Bruce Wayne's world, and he is still just a kid. He's like 17, trying to figure out how to be a detective and maintain responsibilities, which me myself, I can kind of relate, especially to now, because I don't go around solving crimes, but the way I interact with people, I can kind of, infer or guess if something has happened, especially in my workplace, because I deal with so much outside drama and what people try to do to set you up. But again, I'm not going to get into all that. Um, Pretty much, I love the series mainly because it had that nice futuristic look, but at the same time, they didn't go over the top. And it turned like into Spider-Man, 2099. I think even the series itself, it was very decent. I think it was the year 2029 it was in. Yeah, I could be wrong. And tell me in the comment section. Yeah, it could have been 2020 or 2030, but it was around that time. And the funny thing is that when they were coming up with this, they were still debating with the whole time jump if they wanted to kill off Bruce Wayne, and then one of the producers that slammed his fist and said no. And oh, excuse me. And even if you see Batman, not Batman, Justice League Unlimited, uh, Bruce Wayne is still alive. He's like 90 years old, and Terry is still Batman in his 30s, and it was kind of cool to see him not be dead, but he's still alive and kicking. He had to be like 90 years old at that point. But a lot of the next brilliance of the series is that they gave Terry his own rogues gallery. Only about throughout the whole series, I think only about like four villains, no, six villains, uh, six original villains had showed up or they were mentioned, and the most dominant one was Mister Freeze, and Bane had a cameo, but he was all shriveled up. Uh, Ra's al Ghul slash Talia al Ghul. I ain't really want to spoil that episode because you can watch it for yourself on here on YouTube. And the Riddler and Two Face were shown, but they were robots. And then Catwoman was mentioned, and of course you have the Joker's gang. And Batman Beyond the movie kind of revealed more about what happened with the Joker. And the crappy thing is that the one flaw, excuse me, need to get some sleep. The one flaw that the series did kind of have was continuity issues, because Batman does meet the Justice League of this in this future, and Superman is there, and there's a Green Lantern. Those are the only ones I can really recognize. Oh, there was a variation of Hawkgirl, but the dude was called Warhawk. Again, I'm gonna talk about more about this in season 3, but mainly with the Justice League and the continuity. Uh, Spoiler alert: Superman was infected with some kind of starfish that made him go rogue. And the weird thing is that if you see, and even the producers said this at one point, that was a small issue when they were doing Justice League, was that technically the Clark that they were around was infected with the starfish, but they, they never really said when it happened, and then not to mention they probably changed time a couple of times, and it probably didn't exist. It's probably two DC animated universes now that I think about it. So it's kind of funny how that happened. And of course, you have Justice League Unlimited, where Terry finds more about Bruce and himself, uh, in a very intense way. And again, I'm not going to spoil it for you because it was a shocker to me because my friend had told me and I didn't really believe him. But, even they said with the design of, oh my God, I yawn one more time, I'm going to flip. But if you look at the design of Terry and even his brother Matt, he doesn't look like the original parents that they gave him in the first place. And that was another flaw of mine, is that I really wanted him not to be that super close to Bruce. If you already know where I'm going at it, I really wanted him to be his own. And I say that because I was watching The Mask of Zorro, and I was a Zorro fan. Ironically, that's who the character Batman's based off of. Him in the Shadow. And if you see the 1998 version or 97 version with Antonio Banderas and Anthony Hopkins, that's what the relationship kind of reminded me of. Was, he was training the next generation of Zorro, and they weren't related. But one guy was a senior, the other one was the youth, and it was kind of interesting to see. The only difference, of course, was that Antonio his character had to be like 27 years old, or he was pretty much an adult. He wasn't a teenager, but he was still reckless because the story was based off of vengeance of these two men. One had his brother killed and beheaded, and then the other one had his whole life, destroyed, yeah, by a dictator or a politician. So it's kind of cool how both the characters that came together, and even on Batman Beyond, it was the same dynamic. Bruce couldn't fight crime anymore. He was, he pretty much was saying, let the cops take care of it, and then crime has went crazy ever since he stopped being Batman. And then Terry, he was very smart and he was a good martial artist, but he did have a rap sheet. And later, you see season 3, one of his best friends comes back who was actually a villain, and he's been to juvie and all this. But there are some people who used to be like that. Some of them were on the police force. They used to be troublemakers, but now they're on the right side of the law. And it really is a testament of people who do crime like that, and 9 times out of 10 it's because they didn't have a father or some kind of authoritative figure to not really dictate them, but to try to warp their perspective a little bit. And every kid is different. I had my banter. My dad wasn't in my life, but I did have a man. I had 2 good men that were in my life that in different time periods, to go on a straight and narrow path. But it is about perspective and how you see the world, but also what they say in that passage in the Bible. You understood as a child, you learned as a child, but when you became a man, you had to put away childish things. So it is the same narrative here. And going back to Batman a little bit, the whole futuristic stuff, going off, point off the point. Akira was a little bit of an influence, and even in the first episode and more of the episodes, you see the influence, especially with the motorcycles and the action scenes. So that was pretty cool. One of the bikes looked just like Connie does. And again, I might mention again when I review Akira. But it was very cool how these little tidbits and nods that they get into. And closing out, I want to say that with this TV series, I think it would have lasted longer if it didn't have such dark material that freaked out the parents. But me personally, I think it needed to be told because there are a couple of episodes, and I'm gonna talk about it in season two. But in season one, they even had a few high school episodes, and I think the best one was the slappers episode. That's the one that Bane appears in. These slappers have the venom, and it gives the person strength. And one of the one of the reasons they never fully stated this, but um, at least the Warner Brothers never stated this, but a lot of people in the animation community knows that follows Batman. The subject matter that they were getting into were real issues that were going on in the 90s into the end of 2000s. And I mentioned the Slappers episode because I remember at one point hearing that a couple of kids were using steroids. I don't know if they were pressured by the coach, their parents, or they just wanted to do it to get better. And a lot of these kids were having these weird side effects, and of course ODing. So that was one strong prevalent episode of the drugs you know in the school system. And ironically, since he is based, some of the story matters based off of Spider-Man. Spider-Man had an issue where one of his friends or a bystander was hallucinating off of heroin, and he thought he could fly. And it was funny because with the comics at the time in the 60s and 70s, they had a comic codes authority, and it was certain things they couldn't talk about. But I think Stan had said in the interview that particular issue, the government actually gave them permission to do it because they realized how many kids were taking it, and it was pretty much like a public service announcement project for him, as well as Superman and Captain America, you know, were doing at the time. I don't know if Batman had did any, but with the TV show, it took it in a realistic way with the drama. And I think personally, with the real world issue, that was one of the best episodes because anybody who watched it and who were around at the time, they would have said this sounds like a steroid epidemic in the late 90s, where a lot of the kids who were athletes were taking this and they were ODing, or they had tested them and they were positive for the drug and they got arrested and their whole record got messed up. And there were probably a couple more stories. Oh yeah, the season one also focused a little bit more on greedy corporations, and that's also a relevant thing. It's much more heavy now, but I think at in that point in the late 90s and of course in the 80s, it was a lot going on behind the scenes that people didn't catch on until you had whistleblowers and moles inside of the organizations giving these spills on what these organizations are doing, and the people that are paying them to let them do it, and how they all make a profit. And it was about, I know the pilot episode dealt with that. There was a whistleblower, and it was the reason why Terry's father had got killed indirectly. And then it was I think another episode in the middle of the series. I mean of the 13 episodes, and finally with the end. And it was just very, very unique how they did it. And even with some of the corporation stories, it gave Batman his own rogues gallery. And I think I said it earlier, I didn't get into much detail, but what I liked about it was that the creators had even said that they didn't want to do offsprings of the villains, but they did give, there were character types. So like for example, um, the character of Catwoman's character type, it was with the Royal Flush Gang, and the character, specifically was 10, and it was this new girl at Terry's high school, and they hit it off immediately after he broke up with his main girlfriend. That's one good example. The next one is uh season two, which was Mad Stan. I think that was Terry's Bane. The only difference was that he was kind of a luckhead. And you have Spellbinder, which was the Scarecrow, and you have Ink, who was Clayface. You had all these different villains that I personally, knew. where they were that who the character type was. You could say Blight could have been the Joker, but it could have been Lex Luthor at the same time. So I don't think he even showed up back in the series after the first season, which is kind of ironic. But I think he appears in the comics, and the comics I might talk about that season 3 because I personally have one, and it got a little bit more edgy. It didn't go into R territory, but it went into good implementation of rated R material, which why I like that particular comic. It introduced a new villain, and then it combined all the other ones. But this is a very good series if you're a Batman fan. I know a lot of kids who grew up in the '90s. They either watched Justice League or it was this. Not to hate on the original, you know, Batman, animated series. The look of it was slightly based off of Max Fleischer's Superman, and had all the classic stuff in the comics. But uh, I think it was trying to appeal to what was going on at the time. And even the original Batman, it was very good because they were pretty much telling what 23-minute movies. And even with Batman Beyond, they did the same thing. Every single episode was pretty much like its very own movie, its own, you know, how can I say it, beginning, middle, and it had a lot more meat that they could have stretched out into a 2-hour film. And that's not the only series that's done that. Tales from the Crypt did the same thing. That's another series I really love, and how they did their story narrative, because it did feel like a movie, and even with the suspense and horror and the psychological aspect, it worked very, very well. You can take each one and have a good screenwriter and director and stretch it out to a full-fledged film. And even with Batman, you could do the same thing, because, like I said, it was relevant to a lot of, you know, with season 1 the the high school and the corporate stories, and of course there was a bullying episode in there as well. I think it was a reference to Columbine just a little bit. But check it out if you haven't seen it. Hopefully, anyone of the late generation can see this series and really like it. My brother, he didn't see every episode like I did. He only seen a couple because mom raised us different. But other than that, see you guys next time in season 2. Peace.